Great. Welcome, everyone, to the 40, is it our 40th event? We started Artivism, the power of art for social transformation, back in spring of 2021. So this is our third semester, and we welcome everyone. As you can see, we're even international as of this semester. Anyone who would like to either attend or present or serve as a student ambassador, please feel free to contact me or Professor Agelarakis or Carolina, and we can arrange that for you. Art has the power to change minds, as we're seeing right now with what's going on with Ukraine. It has the power to inspire, to shape narratives, incredibly powerful images coming out of Ukraine and around the world right now. And so hopefully students are seeing in real time what art actually can do and the power that it has. We are delighted to have y'all here, and I hope that you will visit our Artivism. If you type in Artivism in Adelphi, it brings you to the Artivism website. That's the easiest way to explain it to folks. And you can register for any of our upcoming events, which are typically on Mondays in the afternoon. And we welcome all. You don't have to be an Adelphi student. This is a multimodal, interdisciplinary, inter-university, inter-nation initiative. And so all are welcome. So share the website with anyone you think might be interested. Thanks so much. I'll hand it over to Archie now. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Dr. Lake, for having us and supporting us. Today we have Dr. Melanie Levick-Parkin from the UK, from Manchester. She is a feminist design researcher and design educator with an interest in heritage, human making practices, and visual material language. There is a particular focus on gender and design in her research, and she works within speculative and design anthropological methods and approaches. She is passionate about situating design in the context of political, social, and environmental justice and ethics, and hopes design can become a better person. Thank you.
I do indeed. Right, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for having me. Very grateful for the team at ARTIVISM. Let me get my screen up and then we can kick off. Okay, can you see that okay? Yeah, great. Okay, so welcome to a talk on gender and design, and I have my official title there, which is Dr. Melanie Levick-Parkin, and my official role that I play at the university, which is program leader of postgraduate design at Sheffield Hallam University. But really, people who know me as Mel. They also know me as a mom of four, with a husband, friends, family, and all those other things. And the reason why I'm telling you that is because I'm a feminist design researcher. And as a feminist design researcher, I value being present in my work and showing myself in a three-dimensional way, and also the feminist tenet of that the personal is political kind of guides me, and how we frame that idea that the personal is political from the micro into the macro is really important in how we think about all this stuff. And hopefully I'm not going to focus talking on about that here, but it will show a little bit in the work that I'm going to talk to you about.
Perfect. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Now I just don't really know what's coming up next, so I just hope my narrative will hold up. Right, okay, and I also have to move the little screen so I can see what it says. So the discipline of design plays a central role in how the human world is constructed, yet material agency is distributed unequally, economically, culturally, and by gender. So what design are we talking about here? We're talking about any kind of design, basically. And if you have a look at this list is by no means exhaustive. And really, it's about realizing how design impacts on all our lives in lots of different ways and is often invisible. And the things that you can see here are more actually the things that are visible and that we think of as design. But design is actually much, much more. But I'm starting with a piece of historical visible design. To anybody who's never seen this contraption here, which is this metal thing around a woman's head, this is called a skull's bridle. And it was designed in the Middle Ages to punish women who talked too much. And it had a thing that went into your mouth. And if you try to eat or talk or do anything, basically it would cut in your tongue. And a local magistrate could order someone to wear that for a specific amount of time. The reason why it's a particularly cool kind of piece of design, but for me as a designer, it's an interesting thing because it materializes the desire to control somebody's behavior in a way that's very, very tangible. But often the things that, the way our behaviors are designed or things are designed is much less graphic than this. You know, it's much less visible. But you can see, you know, someone has had a good little think about here how best to construct these things. And, you know, as a designer, you know, this is the kind of stuff the kind of sketches our students might do for their very different design processes. But nevertheless, you can see that the process is the same. Something that's been very important recently as a book for us in design has been Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez, where she is really discussing data. So it says exposing data bias in a world designed for men. What she does really, really well is that she talks about lots and lots of data, and she makes it interesting and easy to understand. And she has communicated to a very broad audience with that. You know, this is probably the first book where I know a lot of my male design colleagues have picked this up, and where a lot of, you know, where people might have said, oh, I never thought about it. So there are a couple of things that I wanted to highlight in terms of what she talks about. One of the things she talks about is the default male. So that seeing men as the human default is fundamental to the structure of human society. So we see that in how evolution is talked about, in how language is constructed. We see that in science. We see that in representation. But all those things don't happen by accident. They happen through design. In a way, she builds on a history of feminist writers who have tried to show women's invisibility in different settings and different scenarios. For example, like Sheila Rowbotham, Hidden from History. But this is only one example. There's many other books out there. But there's a clear feminist agenda to highlight how women have been missing in many ways from the canon, from research, from science, from all those areas. There's a couple of things, I mean, there's lots of interesting things that she discusses. One of the things that makes it quite clear in terms of how the design or the leaving women out of the design process or out of the thinking process or out of the planning process is an example where she talked about a gender equality initiative in 2011 in Karlskoga in Sweden. So it was something where they started to look at how snow clearing was being organized in the city. And someone joked saying, well, snow clearing can't be sexist, can it? So then the group of people who were working on it thought, well, can it? Maybe it can. And they looked at it and they realized that the priority was given for snow clearing to happen first thing in the morning for all the streets into the city center. And that the pedestrian and public transport ways were cleared last. And they found that this impacted on women the most, because most women would have multiple trips in the morning, dropping the kids off, getting some shopping, going to see an elderly relative, maybe even going to work. Whereas most men were traveling, still primarily traveling directly to work in the car first thing. So that's, even in 2011, that's how it kind of would break down in Sweden. What they realized was actually that because in Sweden, everybody has cars equipped with snow tires, and they're quite capable of driving on roads that have had snowfall, unlike in the UK, that the impact was far greater in terms of public health issues on those people who were walking or having local journeys. So the most pedestrian injuries, single injuries, they were 69% women because of those journeys. So they changed that around, and it had a huge impact on those kinds of accidents, on how people were able to get about. So it's kind of from the artifact to the system, all those things kind of need to be constantly examined. And I'm sure a lot of these things are not done maliciously. It's just something that almost happens automatically. So it bears careful consideration, whatever is you're thinking about as a designer. The woman who wrote that book, she also asked for a woman to be shown on a British banknote when a new banknote was designed a few years ago, and that caused a huge uproar, and she ended up getting death threats. She had to move, she had to disappear from social media completely. And what's so shocking is that like it says here, who expects death threats for asking for a woman on a banknote? But it just shows you how the boundaries of what we can ask for and what is acceptable, what is seen as acceptable, are still quite restricted in many ways. And the moment you cross that boundary, you actually welcome a certain amount of violence through that kind of exposure. Design has always been about future making, but the question is always, whose future are we making? And, even though these books actually this book was really important in design, but you can see even in the language, it's man-made futures. And Papanek talks about which man shapes his tools and environments. There's a lot of stuff in the canon in design that really doesn't address women either as consumers or as designers or as meaning makers and form givers. So we have traveled a long way, but there's still that fundamental, knowledge that's being built on over and over, and it's being reproduced often without people realizing. These are some things that have been important to me in my own studies, and they're kind of linked in a way. So Mary Beard talks about how she's a classicist, and she talks about the underlying misogyny that really has come through from the Greek philosophers into the Western canon and into Western philosophy, and the idea of the danger of giving women a voice, which is kind of very, very fundamental to how Western thought has developed. And then on the other side here, I've got women's work, which really talked about the evidence of women's design in the human record. So I'm really interested in archaeology and anthropology, because really a lot of the artifacts that are being discussed there are really design practices as well. Excuse me. So, and design anthropology is an interesting area to look at, especially if your area is not design, because it can engage lots of different people from different disciplines in design thinking and in situating their own practices within a design context, or realizing what the design aspects are of their own practice. So I thought I'd just put that in. These are other things that are very important to me in terms of how we're looking at design. So even though on the surface, this book here, Staying Alive, Women, Ecology and Development, might not seem like a design book, but it actually talks about women's agency in relationship to the land they live in, how they interact, their sustainable or unsustainable practices, but also how they have not really been accounted for, especially by anthropology, but also by the World Bank and any other organizations. It's normally, the women's practices are normally not looked at, and it's often to the detriment of the community. Decolonizing methodologies, design justice, and designing disability. Again, these are things that are important when we're thinking about intersectional approaches to design. And then there's the ongoing project to make visible women in the history of design that have not really had the exposure that they deserved. And this is just one example. There's many books out there, not enough as far as I'm concerned. There's a lot to catch up on. But actually, this talk will discuss some of the ways in which gender power relations impact on the design of artifacts, sites, and systems that we live within and by. Now, these things are all just screen grabs, either from newspapers, online newspapers, or from blogs. What I'm trying to make evident here is that whenever you see anything like this, it's design, and someone's made design decisions, and it's sat within a system that isn't necessarily design, but it has the practice of design within it. So the automotive safety design issue has been with us for a long time, that the crash test dummies traditionally have always been male. This goes back to what Criado Perez talks about in relationship to the male being the neutral, kind of assumed to be the neutral form of the human. It's to our detriment in lots of different ways. And also, you know, thinking about, for example, not just the binary male-female body, but there's lots of different other kinds of bodies, and design is starting to do a better job, but it needs to do a much better job in accounting for those. Even something like this, if you think about interior design, so this is where things like science is important as well. You know, what are you finding out? What is the context for it? And what are the implications? So if women are working in an office that's too cold for them, are they not being as productive? Are they more likely to fall ill? You know, are they, you know, not best placed to kind of concentrate? All those kinds of things, you know, so these things might be quite small, but the impact potentially could be greater than we might suspect initially. This is something that came out during COVID, and you know, this is really something, for example, I've been talking to some of my fashion colleagues about this. So if you think that most of the protective PPE, the protective equipment, was designed to fit a kind of standard male body, but yet when you look at the people who work in the care industry and they are primarily female, you know, something like 80%, probably over 80% of nurses are female in the UK at least. And yet they were wearing safety clothing that didn't fit them. So that wasn't just a case of it being a comfort thing, but actually that's a case of where that was endangering their lives. And, you know, they couldn't protect themselves even when they did have access to the PPE, to the right PPE, because it wouldn't fit very well. And I'm sure we all remember those images on social media of people coming from their shifts with, you know, like the really deep lines where the equipment have been digging into their faces and into their bodies. So it's interesting to think about how our bodies, you know, are interacting with design in different ways and what the different sides are. You know, there's the other side of it where, again, historically, and this was posted by the lovely Elizabeth Resnick, who has written on the subject and also on design, citizen design, amongst other things. So the idea of how are women perceived, and this might seem really outdated, but there's still these things that are, you know, this is an article from The Guardian not so long ago, where female artists are still talking about the perception of them within the art world and how that hinders their practice and their progression. We've got the ongoing thing about, you know, the pay gap, and that's not unique to any profession. But again, it's difficult to pull these things apart because they're so interlinked. For material agency to be I'm missing something there. To be distributed equally, not only by gender, but also by age, class, ethnicity, we need to better understand how design's role in reproducing inequality. Sorry, that's, I must have copied something over there in the wrong order. So basically, but this is about better understanding design's role in reproducing inequality and demand a future design practice that attends to gender equality and social justice. Now, I have done some work. I'm not gonna linger on this for a very long time. I have been working with women in the craft context. I completed my doctorate in 2018 based on looking at female making practice, which I started after my fourth son was 2. So, and I think I was 37 at that point in time, 38. I was also working at the same time, and I just want to declare here that it was really difficult. And I come from a fairly kind of privileged position of having a job, of having a home, of, you know, not suffering a lot of discrimination based on other things. So, but it's hard to achieve any of these things. You know, I've written some papers, I've written a book chapter, but the reality is probably that I will never be able to catch up. And I think that's also important for me to say, because we still suffer from the lie of meritocracy in terms of what we can achieve and what we can do. So the idea of having it all and then still outperforming or competing, and I think we need to stop that, because actually those are fairy tales, and there's always a price that we all have to pay for whatever life decisions or ways in which we are living, even if we're not hindered by poverty, by ethnic discrimination, and God forbid wars or anything else like that. But I have done some stuff, and the fact is that as I'm still learning as well, and there's lots to learn. We had a talk with other women about women's visual and material voice making in the public sphere with Irene Linardaki in Greece. You know, I've made some visuals. I don't really get to make enough stuff with all the other things that I'm doing, but sometimes, sometimes I get other women who encourage me, so that's very valuable. We also just started a gender and design research network at Sheffield Hallam University, and that's the interdisciplinary network with people from lots of different disciplines who want to look at exactly these kinds of things we're talking about here. So we need a design practice that transcends traditional and binary constructions of gender and addresses intersectional lives. And the thing I really want to talk to you about is the kind of stuff that is out there and that other people are doing, because they are the people that I look to and they are the people that I learn from. And there's quite a lot of women who are younger, a lot younger than me, who are doing some really interesting stuff. There's quite a lot of people who are not women, who are younger than me, who are doing really interesting stuff in relation to gender. And I would encourage you to actually go and have a look at some of this if you're interested. So, for example, I was invited to a design symposium that was in Germany, which talked about the issues of gender and design and the experience of women and non-binary person in the design industry. Some of the people who were there were from the depatriarchized design organization. They are absolutely invaluable. The work that they're doing is really, really great. And they are, a collective of different people, and they're really at the cutting edge of discussing these things. Then there's Elizabeth Resnick, who has an ongoing traveling exhibition in relation to human rights. Women's rights are human rights, and it remains, unfortunately, ever topical. And we're hoping that she'll come and exhibit in Sheffield, where my university is as well, very soon. Then I'm part of the International Gender Design Network, who, again, their mission and objectives are to specifically raise the topic of gender inequality and gender issues within design. They have the Effiegenia Design Award, where they it had a fallow year in COVID, but there was the last one was in 2021, and they invite submissions from designers in relation to gender sensitive design. And if you go on their website as well, there's examples of that kind of work, but I've got a few things to show you here as well. So, for example, this particular designer, the typographer Hannah Witte, she was looking at how to include the LGBTQ plus star in the German language. And obviously German has male and female in the way the language is constructed. So just from a typographic perspective, she was examining how to do that. And she won the Effiegenia Volition Award in 2021. Then I went to this conference, which was really great, which was about gender equality and diversity, hosted by someone called Julia Constance Dissel, again, who's a really interesting researcher in this context. And they had some great people there. And this work is all accessible online. And even though some of this is in German, but I'm sure there's some aspects of it that are in English as well when you go on the website. So this was on a this is a site called Divided by Design by the designer Daphne Brown. And she was looking at actually how our objects are designed. And she was looking at how the binary of man and woman impacts on design. And she talks about how hierarchy, homogenization of groups, and the exclusion of specific genders kind of materializes in design objects. And she talked about how there's an invisible script that we follow, not only when we construct design, but also when we read design. And as consumers, we're, or, you know, not even as consumers, as human beings, we're constantly reading. We're reading materials and objects as much as we're reading words. So for example, this is something where she picked up on the pseudo-neutrality of designed objects, where, do you get Kinder? Yeah. Okay, just checking. So the idea that the neutral one is the one that everybody can have, and that's kind of the male version. And then they came up with one specifically for girls. And I'm sure you can recognize that in lots and lots of objects, and especially design for children. Now, I grew up in the 70s, and it's interesting to look back at photographs of clothing or even toys, because in the 70s, actually, it was far less gendered in that way than it is now when you go to a toy shop or you go and look at things that kids, you know, are targeted at kids. But she also looked at other things. So for example, how are objects and design, sorry, I just need to shut the door because my son is on his Xbox and he's shouting at his friend. Just a second. Sorry, you might have to edit that out. So for example, she was looking at, you know, this is a drill, it's male coded, it is in strong colors, it shows its functionality on the outside, it has lots of extra bit that kind of almost mock functionality. I think it's the idea of it's read as male, it's intended to be read as male, and that's where it kind of belongs, because it's part of a DIY, it's a DIY tool. This is a kitchen object. I've forgotten what they're called now. Anyway, it's the mixer of some sort. And there, you know, you get something much more neutral, you get something much lighter, you get kind of rounded curves. And also the one thing that she talks about, Daphne talked about, was that the functionality is hidden. So you don't necessarily see, you know, where buttons are, how things are working, you know, everything is kind of enveloped and more mysterious in a way. So even then looking at two objects that have exactly the same function, so a female targeted eraser and a male targeted eraser, and what she's analyzing here is that the scripts actually tell us that on the male targeted eraser, you have lots of different buttons, you have a display, you can't see that on here, but something that she talked about, that you can see the screws on this object, yeah? So, and that isn't done by accident, that's done on purpose. So that idea that, you know, if a man wanted to, he could open it up and fix it, yeah? So it has all those different scripts built into the object, whereas the female coded object is, again, you know, it's got that very kind of soft outline. It has everything hidden. It just has this one button. It has seams, press seams, rather than anything where there's any screws visible. So they are the ways in which every day we're handling things that are coded. Then another presenter there, Julia Pizzina, talked about how there is way less women on Wikipedia than men. So here she's saying there's 700,000 articles about males and 140,000 about women, and only 96 articles about non-binary people. So then that in itself is kind of, they're shocking statistics, I think. And so she talked a little bit about, you know, why that is and how that's, you know, the difficulties of trying to amend that. She talked about some of the activist groups that she's involved in order to try to work against that. And that was part of the kind of, you know, also call to action and attention to that kind of invisibility again. So because the rules that Wikipedia has are not necessarily friendly to people who do not get a lot of traffic. So if you don't get any traffic, you can fall off the publishing list. So hence, it's kind of, it's almost like a self-fulfilling slide into the invisible, unless you've got things that are working against that. And she was talking about how they were trying to work against that in terms of women's visibility online, which also led to them talking about how there is quite a lot of feminist activism within coding, and coding design actually is very important. It's becoming ever more important. We know that a lot of coding happens in scenarios which is not particularly neutral, but it thinks it's neutral. The scripts that are written in coding are often misogynist, racist, and all those other things. Algorithms, you know, are ultimately only as woke as the people who are writing them. And that has a huge impact on how people can use and access technology in lots of different ways. So that was something in terms of looking at who is working on these things in relation to women's issues. There was also something from a male contributor who was talking about representation of males in the media, because actually it's really important that we have men working on these issues. I have 4 sons. I don't necessarily think that the stereotypes that men are presented with are particularly healthy for them either. So that's something to bear in mind, that actually all these things we just talked about should and could also be examined from a male perspective. Then there's people who work in design education, and they actually think about how do we teach these things. And I'm sure there's people in other parts of education other than design education, maybe even, you know, on the courses that you are taking. And obviously you've got the artivism team here. So the idea of how do we make these issues kind of come to life in the curriculum, and how are we critical about them? There's a lovely team at Technical Milan, and they have a specific curriculum where they're looking at representation in the media of women and of non-binary people. And they've kind of, you know, if you look at advertising, for example, you know, I mean, immediately these images actually are quite shocking, but they are quite, you know, this is just from a fashion magazine. these images are just from different, and they had like 5 pages of these, women's representation in video games. So it's kind of, how do we normalize a certain kind of perception of genders, and how do we as designers become alert and act against that? And they've come up with kind of a particular methodology to approach that, and they're talking about media literacy and gender sensitive critical approaches. So there's lots of different people who are doing these different things. I'm just going to get through. Yeah, there was also, you've got at Stanford University, you've got these intersectional design cards. And again, if you go online, there's lots of information about them there. And they also make clear that intersectionality is really the foundation of any of these kinds of endeavors. And they worked for a number of years to develop those cards. There's also, connected to that, for you guys, for any of you guys who might not be related to design in the disciplines that you're studying. So it's really worth having a look at this side, gendered innovations, because it breaks it down into lots of different areas and shows how just having a critical lens, it can actually make your work so much better. Because actually, you know, a lot of the stuff, it's not so much even about, oh, are we designing for women? Are we designing for men? It's actually, are people doing good design? Are they doing good research? And are they doing good science? And, you know, I would argue that actually, in order to do good research and science, you have to kind of have a critical lens when you're looking at how you are putting your work together. Yeah, I've put this in because actually I often end up talking a lot about design practice, professional design, but my heart really is in general human making practice, and also women's practice, and all the stuff that we don't get to see, and the things that people just do in order to make their own lives a little bit better and more enjoyable, and that aesthetic enjoyment. This was a blog post I saw about, where was it? In the village of Sebi. And the idea that these women paint their walls every year, but it gets washed away. So that impermanence of design, actually, there's something really important about that, because, you know, again, we're kind of rapidly moving towards ecological disaster. And one of the issues that design has, that it's responsible for producing a huge amount of rubbish, of things that actually, do we really need them? So how do we, you know, we can still have beauty, we can still have design, we can still make our environments better and make meaning and give form, but we really need to find new ways of doing so. Preferably not using copious amounts of plastic and oil. And yeah, so these women are way ahead of most of us. There's you know, these kind of I'm really interested in speculative design, and speculative design, even though it's just recently kind of become this big thing in design, and it's used by other disciplines as well, but it's been with us for a long time. And in many ways, design is always speculative. This was a woman called Frances Gabe, who an interior designer and architect, and who hated cleaning that much, apparently, that she designed a whole house that could be hosed down, so she wouldn't have to do it. I mean, what's interesting is obviously even that is trapped within its own binary of who does what of its time. You know, these days, hopefully, I'd think that it wasn't the women's job anymore to clean the house, although from the stories that I hear from my friends, we may not have moved on as much as we might like. So there's something about that futuring that's always been really important to the feminist cause, because we've always had to think about how could the future be different. And from feminist utopianism to feminist philosophy, design is really a great way to think about, in a material way, of how we can create different futures and how they might materialize. There's the difficulty that whenever you go into the public realm with any of these things, that you attract potentially a lot of negativity. I'm very hesitant in how I am present in the public realm, but ultimately, I'm in admiration to so many people who are out there much more kind of actively in an activist way. We can't be scared all the time. And, so there's that thing from it being uncomfortable to something also to the ridiculous, where even when we are out there and even when it's not meant in a terrible way, often whatever we're doing can be very easily dismissed. So it's a case of actually thinking about, how can you sustain your practice and how can you be out there in whatever discipline you are out there, and take up some space and also facilitate space for others who might not have the same power as you have. That was just put in as a little reminder. Yeah, I mean, this has been kind of, Audre Lorde has been hugely influential on anything that you might think about, and how she talks about voice and presence and activism is very, very inspiring and humbling. The kind of sharpness of intellect and foresight, and also of demand that, you have to go out there, you have to do something. And it might not be as loud or as big as, as kind of that it attracts lots of attention to you in a negative way, but it's about finding your voice in some kind of way. And, it's interesting because also in many ways, we get co-opted into things, historical narratives, how is female agency viewed? How is gender viewed within the context of history? These things kind of change, have an impact, are meaningful, are abused. They are very messy. Women have been very, very visible recently. And the interesting thing for me as a designer is there's always a designed element for me to look at. So there is even in the ritual, in the action, there is a kind of that meaning making process is about communication, and it's about communicating with others. So it doesn't always have to be captured in an artifact or object in order for me as a designer to consider it design. However, it's very nice when people capture it in objects, like this thing that I saw recently, this post that I saw recently from and I think that was Arc Athens. Sorry, I can't see it because something's on top of it. But this person just put all their heroes onto a total.
Love this.
Yeah, it's really nice. Sorry, I can't see the thing because it's it might be that, this is again, you know, this is a piece of design, but it's also about the body, and it has so many different layers of meaning. So depending on where we find ourselves, it's really just about having an awareness of that. As human beings, we read everything, and we can construct what we read, and we can construct our texts, our designs, our objects, our systems in ways that are hopefully moving us to better futures, or that help others. And, you know, even at this point in time, you know, science is helping us reassess historic assumptions. So it always depends on where we're looking and how we're thinking about these things. And it might be as simple as taking a bunch of NASA tank tops from the boys section and putting them in the girls section. It's about spotting those opportunities to actually kind of, to just affect a small little change. And to me, that in itself is kind of a conscious design of our environment. It's an affecting of our environment. And I think that must be the last one. Yeah.
Oh, thank you,
Okay.
Melanie. This was
Thank you
so
very much.
enlightening, I want to say. I don't know what word, because it's inspiring in some ways, but it's enlightening. It opened my eyes to many things I didn't know. Just before we go to questions and the discussion, next week we have Aphrodite Desiree Nabab. She will be presenting on the wind-up dolls. Freeing up the wind-up doll. That's on the 28th at 4:30. Again, you can follow us on Instagram at ARTIVISM for Shared Humanity, the same for YouTube and Facebook. Any questions, any comments? Nope, Stephanie.
Well, I was fascinated to hear about the gender design research at Sheffield, the program that you all are doing, interdisciplinarity, because my dissertation from 20 years ago was on gendered conceptions of dangerousness, looking at the treatment of women in Richmond, Virginia, who were convicted of first-degree homicide, first-degree murder, and how went into details on how perceptions of culpability and dangerousness were almost written into the language that's used by judges and in the sentencing guidelines. And it was fascinating to see that the idea of culpability, even that in and of itself, is gendered and written into the statutes. And that's something that needs to be addressed. You know, I was doing pairing, so I was, you know, comparing individuals, men and women, who had been convicted of the exact same charge. But if you read the pre-sentence investigation report, you see that what they actually did was very different. So I would be fascinated to learn more about I wrote it down, the research institute, or the gender and design program.
It's the Gender and Design Research Network. Now, we only just started this year, but we do have people who are from sociology, politics, and also from, as I mentioned, the Helena Kennedy Research Center. And it's interesting because I'm kind of, even though it's so far outside of my own discipline, but as a designer, I'm really interested in legislation, and I'm interested. Actually, it gives form to our world that we live in. So it has material consequences. So I'm really interested in the link between the law and design, and the application of law and the design of law, and then how we can detect that in our lived realities. And it's interesting also that you said that you did that 20 years ago. We're going to present at the Design History Conference with a colleague of ours who is from another older generation, and because she shared a document with us that women wrote in the 1980s about being a female designer. So, you know, and we're looking at the things that they're writing and we're thinking, okay, that's gotten a little bit better, but and then all those things that, you know, haven't really moved on, you know, and we're still asking the same question. Yeah. We're thinking, Christ, you know, what can we do to push this down the road a little bit further? And actually, you know, in many ways, even in the last five years, the awareness has become a lot better, and actually the acceptance, but also the backlash has been huge. Yeah. So you've always got that kind of that thing going on.
Oh yeah, yep. But I really appreciated what you said about, you know, I don't think people realize the criminal justice system was designed, and the sentencing guidelines are designed, like someone did them, and that whoever did them reflected a certain perspective. And once people realize that, you would imagine it would be so obvious once you see it, but it's hard to get because of historical inertia. And people think that just because something was designed back in the 1950s or whenever, that it somehow is sacred, when, you know, understanding that it was designed by certain individuals with a certain paradigm in mind, and that will necessarily have to change once.
Yeah, and it's designed in order to shape something. So actually the act is really, it's the same as us designing an interior or us designing a built environment. You know, it's very much a world shaping activity. And yeah, I mean, probably some of the women I admire the most are female lawyers who are working in those areas to rewrite, to contest, to push, because of the, you know, I feel like design is almost, it's a product of the things. It doesn't act back because of how it comes into being and who pays for it and who governs it. Whereas I see legislation or the law actually a place where there's real opportunity to act back in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it.
And I don't really know anything about it, by the way.
Irini?
Sorry, I have to unmute myself. The artist is Blanca Mescua. And she was part of the artist with the two bags with all the names is Blanca Mescua. She's a friend of mine, and she was in an exhibit that we just did that's called Occupy, where Argy was in, and Carolina. She was on the 5th floor with those bags, and I thought it was important to mention her name.
Yeah, no, and I wanted to mention her name, but like, you know, when you're on top of heads is on top of stuff, you try to move it. I couldn't get
I know.
it. Yeah.
I wanted to,
and I saw it because you posted it, and I just thought, yeah, that's really nice. And it's in a way it's so simple, but sometimes it's very difficult to do something that's that simple and communicates that effectively.
Yeah. I wanted to show you something because I very much heard the moment where you spoke about the Kinder eggs, because it's something that my son is often, my younger son is often talking about how shampoo is differentiate, you know, how they make boys and girls shampoo. And he was like, why, you know, why? It's like, and he has long hair, as you know. So it was a discussion at the pharmacy. And then I started noticing, here he is. So I started noticing that you have all these, in kids products, it's very, very important, right? All the boys and girls. And then I remembered while you were talking about, I put the link, if I can I show it to you, Stephanie or Argy? Yeah, let me just show this to everyone. Can you see this?
Yeah.
So do you know Girls Life magazine? Can you see the covers?
Yeah.
So this is from 2016, but I saw it some time ago, and it's the same. It's like the Scouts magazine, right? So it's the boys version and the girls version. It's the same magazine with target audiences.
Yeah.
So the girls one is your dream hair, the friendship rules, wake up pretty, okay,
God.
fall fashion you love, and my first kiss. Okay.
Really?
Yes. The boys' life magazine is explore your future.
Yeah.
Astronaut,
Science,
artist, firefighter.
policing, and war, by the looks of it.
So I'm sorry, but it's so funny that it is the same. They're not two different magazines. It's the same magazine, boy version, girl version, right? So, and you know, anyways, I'll stop sharing. I just want to show you this one.
Why would someone do that? There was, I showed my class a couple of weeks ago. It was from the UK. It was a small classroom, and they told students to draw pictures of a fireman, a surgeon, you know, an Air Force pilot, so on and so forth, blah, 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 policeman. And all the kids' drawings were of men. And the teacher said, how would you like to meet them? And they were like, oh, yeah, one by one, a fireman, an astronaut, a policeman, a surgeon, all came in. And when they removed their gear, their masks, their helmets, they were all women. And then they zoomed in on the classrooms, you know, on the kids' faces, and they were like, women. It was so powerful. And I also showed the Medini, you've probably seen it a million times, that Pantene commercial for hair in Greece. It's a commercial, and I found one on YouTube with English subtitles, and I showed class. We were doing, sociology of art and gender and media, and it's this 1.5 minute commercial, which is way too long for American TV. You would never see, I don't think anyway, a commercial that long, where it's just different people. Women, men, transgender, all gender, beautiful hair, long hair, short hair. And it's like we all have hair, and it was just one bottle of shampoo from Pantene. It's so powerful. And it's Greek television.
I'm looking for that meme on Facebook I saw, which was someone had posted, I think it was TV Digest or something. I don't know if you saw that, Archie. It was from when we were in the 80s. And thank you for my 80s gifts. I just got them. And it was breathtaking, but yet I remember it. It was, just if it can be worse than what you just showed, those covers. And just to think that was what we saw at the counter when we were checking out as young girls, and how that shaped perceptions of.
And also, I don't want, I don't want, like, as I said, I've got 4 sons, and a lot of them are quite artistically interested. And, I don't want them to be forced into roles of, those kind of very binary male kind of stereotypes.
Yeah.
I don't think that's healthy either.
Yep.
Interestingly, a lot of, like the 2 younger ones, they play on, what's that game called?
Minecraft, or
no, it's another one where you get an avatar. They don't look like those examples I showed you.
I don't even know.
But a lot of them play as female avatars, and I've asked them, and they're friends as well, and I've asked them why that is, and they said, the female ones are just much cooler. So that's really interesting that they don't have that,
Yeah.
You can say something.
Well,
Elias wants to say something.
many times when I go to places, many people, like once at school, I was at the vending machine, and this guy, this kid goes up to me and he asks me if he calls me a girl and tells me I can move, and I'm like, excuse me, can you? I'm not moving, and I'm not a girl.
Yeah, good point.
Why should you move because you're a girl?
Yeah, because women should accommodate, shouldn't they?
Oh, yeah.
So he was doubly done there. Not only was he discriminated against based on his hair, it also didn't actually fit. We've got someone with their hand.
Yes, Diet?
Yeah. Okay, can I speak now?
Yes.
please.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Melanie, for your very insightful presentation. I'm from Vietnam, and actually it's 2 a.m. almost 3 a.m. in Vietnam now. But
Oh, wow.
but I'm really appreciate because the first time I encounter with the concept of design, and I don't know that it can be it can be related a lot with my practice here in Vietnam, because I'm I'm caring about the design of a school, the stereotype and other discrimination in school design. And my question is, yeah, when I listen to the presentations or story, I reflect a lot and to the situation in Vietnamese school. And for example, for the dominant of playground for the main student, and so it easy to see that at the playing time, the school is designed for most of the playground are occupied by the male student, for example, and female have a little space for playing, for example. But I want to ask, how can we identify what design are harmful for a specific group? And I mean that, is there any criteria or any sign we can use to see to identify which one is harmful or not?
It's very difficult, isn't it? Because it's a lot of harmful things get done with the best of intentions. So, you know, design has done a lot of harmful things while they were trying to do good. So I think the best thing in any scenario is to follow the design with, not for, and not by. So it's participatory design. It's working with whoever, you know, this stuff is actually for, and listening, and, you know, it's the problem with that often people don't have the time to do it, because it's a longer process, it's a gentler process. It doesn't, you know, it's not all of a sudden, oh, we have some money and now we're going to put this shiny thing there, and then that shiny thing does all the things that you didn't expect it to do. You know, it's about working practices, and the first step in any scenario is to just be alert to it, to be sensitive to it. To even look for it is an important act, because most people don't even look for it.
Yeah, I understand that. So the best way to identify it is looking how it how the design how the design process conducted. It's like how they design a playground, for example, how they design a school. Is it participatory or not?
And it's not always just about the objects, you know, it might be about the social dynamics in a particular situation or in that space, that actually even, you know, even if you change the space, it might be that the social relations override the way the space is used. So then it's a case of actually, how can you act on those things? How can you change them? And, you know, there is always a way, but it might take quite a lot of uncovering, and it might be quite complex. But the great thing is that you're thinking about it. And I teach on the postgraduate design, so we have a lot of international students. And what's really interesting is that a lot of our designers are female, and we've had designers from Vietnam, and we have from all over Asia and from India. And what's interesting in that generation, actually, they really are interested in these things, and they really want to look at them, and they bring their own context. So one of the designers from Vietnam, she specifically looked at her Vietnamese context, and I think she was an interior designer. So I think there is a hunger for that in a different way in that kind of generation of students. So there's you know, I'm very hopeful, and I'm very grateful to be working with them.
Thank you.
I'm really sorry. I've got to go and pick my youngest up from football.
Okay. Thank you so much, Melanie. Carolina, do you want to close up? Thank you. We'd love to have you back and hear more.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks everybody who's made the time to listen in and to comment.
Yes, Dr. Levick, a pleasure to have you, and thank you to the audience. Just a quick 1 second, if we may have from you extra. What would be one key takeaway that you can leave us with today for an action point?
Yeah, that's a good point. Pay attention.
Yeah.
Once you start seeing it, you can't stop seeing it. It's a gift and a curse.
And I think you've drawn our attention to many things today. Thank you so much. Thank
Thanks
you,
very
everyone. Be
much.
well.
Thanks for having me.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.